let me begin by sharing with you a phrase that you may have seen. It's going to be on the screen before you. You may have seen these words on a plaque somewhere. You may have seen these words on a bumper sticker. You may have even seen it on someone's Facebook page. It's part of their cover page on their Facebook page. The words go like this on the screen: you can never have too much happy. You can never have too much happy. That's true, isn't it? You can never have too much happy. It's true. No one ever says, "Oh, I wish I wasn't so happy all the time." Right? No one says that. No one ever says, "I'm sick and tired of feeling so happy. I'm sick and tired of being positive and optimistic every single day of my life." No one ever says that. Instead, it's the opposite, right? Every one of us wants to be happy all the time. Now, here's the thing as we wrap up our series in Paul's letter to the Philippians. Here's the thing. Everybody, especially those of us who are Christians, believers of God, followers of Jesus Christ, but everybody, especially Christians, can be happy if they choose to be. Everybody can be happy if they learn to be. Once again, the Apostle Paul is our example. He's a great example. What we see from his example is that happiness or joy, remember what it means, it's not giddiness because of some circumstance that happens or good fortune in our lives. That's not what this is about. Happiness or joy in Paul's example isn't dependent on circumstances. It is not really dependent on external circumstances. Once again, remember where Paul was when he wrote this letter. He was in prison. And yet, over and over and over again in this letter, short letter, words of joy. He is full of joy. He says rejoice and joy or some derivative of that kind 17 times in this letter. So the overall arching challenge of this letter is to you and I, you too can be happy or joyful, no matter what you're going through. Because it's not supposed to be dependent. True joy, true happiness is not dependent on circumstances in life. So no matter what you are going through, if you choose to be, if you learn to be, you too, you and I, we can be happy, we can live a life of joy. If you've been with us throughout this series, you will have heard a word that keeps popping up, and that word is habit. Habit. Happiness is the result of habitually doing, saying, thinking the right thing. Unhappiness is a result of habitually doing, saying, thinking the wrong things. In other words, it's a matter of choice. Abraham Lincoln once said this: "A man is as happy as he makes up his mind to be. A man is as happy as he makes up his mind to be." Happiness is a habit that you choose to develop. So this has been the overarching theme throughout this series. As we reach chapter 4, here Paul shows us how. He shows us things we can do to choose happiness in our daily lives. So the challenge and a promise is this: if you make these choices consistently, the promise is then you and I will begin to understand Paul's mindset, and we too can experience that true joy in our lives that is not dependent on what's going on or situation in our lives. Today is the last day of our series on Philippians, so if you haven't taken notes before, I'm going to ask you to do so today. Take out a pen, take notes, and allow God to speak to you today. So there are 4 choices that you can make so that you can progress toward happiness. These are practical things that you and I can do. It's one thing to understand what Paul is getting at, but we want to learn to apply it in our lives. Number 1, fill this in. Clear up conflict. Clear up conflict. And we get that from the first verse that I read, verse 2. Paul says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord. So apparently these two women were at odds with one another. Something is going on. We're not exactly sure what the conflict was about, but the fact that Paul wrote it in his letter, he mentions it. We don't know what it was about, but it was big enough that Paul felt the need to address it. He felt the need to mention these two women by name. He called them out. It was big enough. But at the same time, it was small enough, whatever the issue was, the conflict was, it was small enough that Paul knew it could be worked out if they would just make the effort. And if you think about our lives, I think you would agree that, isn't it true that 99% of our personal conflicts, this applies to it. This applies to 99%, almost all of our personal conflicts. In other words, they can be worked out if we would just do so. They can be resolved if we would just take a step in that direction. Notice how Paul adds weight to his pleading. Paul tells them to agree with each other, make up, right? Agree with each other, and then he uses the phrase, in the Lord. Why does he do this? He does this to remind them who they are, remind them who they belong to, remind them who they're living for. In other words, ladies, you are Christians. Act like it. Settle this dispute. Your life is in the Lord. You belong to Him. You are called to be like Him. So let go of any petty conflicts. Don't let this rob you of the joy that is possible in your life. You know what? I think we've all been there, haven't we? We've all gone through seasons or periods of our lives when our happiness is destroyed because of some little squabble with someone else. Isn't that true? Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's a friend. Or maybe it's someone you go to church with. But again, 99% of the time, you can easily clear this up if you would just try. Now, you may be right. I'm not discounting the weight of the issue. You may be absolutely right, and the other person may be absolutely wrong. But there's no point in letting this dispute destroy your happiness. So Paul says, move toward reconciliation. In the Old Testament, there is this verse, Proverbs 20, verse 3. It is to a man's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. You and I, we can get rid of a lot of unhappiness in our lives if we would just make the effort to settle disputes. That's the first way that you and I can choose to be happy. Number two, fill this in. Make everything a matter of prayer. Make everything a matter of prayer. Look at verse 6. Paul continues and he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, okay? By prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to who? God. There's the key word. Everything to God. The truth is, it's hard to be happy when you're worried and anxious about every little thing, right? But the good news is, you don't have to be worried and anxious about every little thing. You don't have to live in a constant state of uncertainty. Why? Because we know that God is in control. Remember, Paul is writing to Christians. So I'm addressing those of us who are Christians. We say we believe in God. We are followers of Jesus Christ. We don't have to live in a state of anxiety or constant worry. Why? Because we say we believe in God. And what does that mean? It means that God is in control. Or have we forgotten that? We know God is in control. We know God has a plan. We know that nothing will happen that God cannot handle. Isn't that part of believing in God? It's like watching the TV show 24. If you've seen it, sometimes 2 or 3 episodes or 2 or 3 times per episode, Jack Bauer gets himself in this seemingly impossible situation. And if you're a fan, you can watch this on Netflix, right? If you're a fan, then you know how thrilling and dramatic it is. But you also know that he will get out of this mess, whatever it is, right? So the entertainment value is in seeing how Jack Bauer does it. That's the entertainment. If that makes sense to you, I propose to you that life is the same way, especially for Christians. Even though we don't know exactly how things are going to work out, even though things sometimes don't work out the way we want them to, yet we do have the privilege of putting everything into the hands of God, knowing that God is in control of every situation and that everything will work out for the best. Paul says we should pray about everything. If there was ever a verse in the Bible that we should take literally, this is the one. Pray about everything. In other words, nothing in your life is too small, too insignificant to God. Perhaps you're saying God is too busy with other things. Why would he care about my itty-bitty problems? You know, yes, I realize there are huge problems in the world, wars and poverty and injustice. I realize that. But I also realize that my God is not small. My God is not limited. Instead, my God is greater than our ability to imagine. He has the capacity, but not only that, he has the willingness. He has the willingness to look after you even to the smallest detail of your life. That's why 1 Peter 5:7 says this, cast what? All your anxiety onto God. Why? Because he cares for you. Make everything a matter of prayer. Choose happiness by choosing to give everything to God, trusting him to take care of the details. And when you and I do this, the challenge, the promise, notice what comes after verse 6. Verse 7 says what? And the peace of God. And the peace of God. So do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And then verse 7 says, and then the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. That's the second way you and I can choose to take a step toward happiness. Here's a third way you can choose to be happy. Number 3, fill this in. Think good thoughts. Think good thoughts. Now, I know it sounds simplistic. It sounds like pop psychology, but really it's true. And notice what Paul says here, verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, what does he say? Think about such things. In other words, think good thoughts. If you were with us earlier in the series, do you remember the Stanford University study? One of the conclusions of that study was this: happy people don't necessarily have better lives than unhappy people. That's not the reason. Happy people don't necessarily have things better in their lives than unhappy people. Instead, the conclusion was a surprise. It's that happy people tend to focus on better things. They have a tendency to focus on better things. Someone once said it like this. It's in your notes and it's on the screen. We don't see things as they are, as they truly are. In other words, we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. Isn't that true? In other words, unhappy people tend to focus on the negative. Whatever it is, a health problem, financial problem, relationship problem, a failed expectation, so on and so on. Because they focus on the negative, it prevents them from being happy. But the truth of the matter is, the fact is, all of us have something negative in our lives, don't we? All of us have something negative in our lives, and any of us can choose to focus on that if we wanted to. And some of us do, don't we? But if you want to be happy, we must develop the habit of thinking good thoughts. How do we do this? Well, let's look more closely at what Paul says. Paul says that we should think about whatever is true, right? What does that mean? And this means that when you and I find ourselves in a difficult situation, simple challenge. Take a moment to think about, to ask yourself, what do I know to be true right now? Even in the midst of my difficulty, this situation. But what do I know to be true right now? And I hope the answer automatically comes this way. In spite of my situation, in spite of my circumstances, I know what is true, that God loves me. That God is with me. God never promised an easy, simple life, but He did promise, I will be with you. I will help to work things out for your good. I know those to be true. Paul said also, think about what is right. So make it a habit to ask yourself, what is right in my life? What is right in my life? Maybe your answer is, I have a job. I have an opportunity to go to school. I have friends, real friends, not Facebook friends. I have real friends. I have family. I have my health. I have this. I have that. In other words, instead of thinking about what is wrong with your life, the challenge is think about what is right, Paul says. Think good thoughts. Paul also said, think about whatever is pure. I don't think it's too difficult to figure out what he means in this, right? There are many, many opportunities throughout the day for you and I to think impure thoughts. The challenge is to hold ourselves to a higher standard. To say things like, at every opportunity, I am going to think pure thoughts. And when my mind is tempted to wander, I'm going to zero in on thoughts of holiness. The list continues. Paul continues. Think about what is lovely, what is worthy to be admired, what is excellent, what is worthy to be praised. Think about these things, Paul says. In other words, think good thoughts. So here's the challenge. If you want to be happy, choose to be happy. How? Choose to think good thoughts. So instead of thinking about whatever is wrong, whatever is bad or ugly or depressing, whatever is vulgar or whatever is worthy of criticism, Scriptures tells us, think about what is good. There's a number 4 today. Here's the 4th way you and I can choose to be happy. And I think this is the most important. Number 4, fill this in. Practice saying, this is good enough. Practice saying, this is good enough. Verse 11 to verse 13. Paul says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And here's that key verse that many of us, if not all of us, know. Verse 13, Paul says, I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. Paul was able to accept each and every situation he faced, whatever may come. How was he able to do this? He knew Jesus was with him, giving him the strength to endure. Let me be honest to you. You can be sure of this. I can guarantee this. Whatever your condition in life is today, it will change. I can guarantee it. Whatever your conditions are today, they will certainly change. In other words, if you're in the valley right now, you're in a low point of your life, There is a mountaintop in the future. And maybe you're on the top of the world right now, but I'll guarantee you there will be a valley not too far away. Why do I say this? This is the nature of us being human beings, right? It's the nature of our existence. It's like a roller coaster. Life is like that. We go through ups and downs again and again and again and again. So here's the challenge. This is the reality of our lives. So if you are happy only when you're at the peak, then you're only going to be happy for a small portion of your life. So the challenge then is this. Take a look at where you are at this moment of time. Be honest with yourself. Examine your life right now and make the choice to say, this is good enough. I can be happy right here. Now, does that mean we forget about the idea of bettering ourselves or bettering our situation that we find ourselves? Of course not. Remember chapter 3. We are always supposed to press on toward the goal. There's a difference between complacency and contentment, and that's in your notes. There's a difference. Complacency says, I accept what I have, woe is me, I won't try any harder for anything better. That's complacency. But Paul talks about contentment. Contentment says, even though I haven't reached the finish line, even though I haven't yet fulfilled all my dreams, I can still fully appreciate and enjoy this step in the journey, right? Life is a journey, but I can still appreciate and enjoy this step in the journey. So brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you to look at your situation with the eyes of contentment. What does that mean? It means recognize the presence of God in the details of your life. Recognize what He's trying to do, how He's trying to move in your life. Recognize the presence of God in the details of your life. Accept each day with a sense of gratitude. Face each moment with a sense of assurance, knowing that whether it's easy or not, you don't completely understand it, but that's okay. You can endure it through Christ who gives you strength. Richard Carlson, he's a psychotherapist who wrote a very well-known book, and some of you may have read it. The book is called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and then ... and it's all small stuff. He's the one who wrote this book. He said that one of the most destructive mental tendencies he has seen in people is this: focusing on what they want rather than on what they have. One of the most destructive mental tendencies in his clients and people in his practice is focusing on what they want rather than what they have. So those who say something like, I'll be happy once this happens, I'll be happy once this desire is met, you know what happens? Ultimately, people who say such things, they just find something new to want. And what happens? Their happiness is further delayed. So Carlson says there is a way to be happy. He says, stop focusing on what you want. Focus instead on what you have. And that's what Paul is talking about here. Again, remember, this is not about complacency. You trust in God, right? But this is what Paul is talking about here. He says that whether he has a little or whether he has a lot, it does not matter. Why? Because he knows he has what is truly most important of all. And what is that? And that's the challenge for you and I. He has what is most important of all. What is it? The presence of Jesus Christ in his life. That Jesus is real. That Jesus will give him the strength and the power to get through what may come. Brothers and sisters, many of us call ourselves believers of God, followers of Jesus Christ. How would we react to these kinds of situations? What is most important in your life? Are we missing out on the joy that Paul is trying to convey to all of us? If you want to be happy, practice saying, "This is good enough." Remember, I'm not talking about complacency, but because of Jesus in my life, in this step in the journey, because I know it doesn't end here, I can appreciate today. This is good enough. Do you know what that means? It means learning to live in the moment. So decide to appreciate all that there is to appreciate in each and every moment of your life. Practice saying, "This is good enough." As we wrap up, I want to once again remind you of Paul's situation when he wrote this letter. He was in prison, and that just blows our mind. He was in prison, facing an uncertain future, likely execution, and yet Paul could not stop talking about joy. Blows our minds. What is his secret? What do we need to hear in this day and age in our lives? The lesson that we keep coming back over and over again in this series is this: joy, true joy, is not the result of pleasant circumstances. If I can just get that job, if I can just get into that program, if I can just whatever. But joy is not the result of pleasant circumstances. Because ultimately something else you will desire for happiness again. Joy is not the result of pleasant circumstances, but rather the result of a pleasant outlook in life, like Paul. A life of happiness, a life of joy is the result of a habit you develop and a choice that you make. So let me give you a recap of the 4 weeks that we spent. A choice to be thankful, week 1. A choice to serve others in week 2. A choice to put Jesus first in your life, week 3. And today, a choice to live in the moment. So as we conclude this series, here's the main point. Happiness is a result of the choices I make. So brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you today to choose a life of happiness. And the great thing is, it can begin right now at this moment. In other words, forget about tomorrow. Forget about yesterday. Don't worry about tomorrow. But take this moment right now to appreciate all that God has given you and all that you have to celebrate, because you can be happy, you can be joyful today and every day for the rest of your life. This is my hope and prayer for all of us today. Let's pray.